Welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're hanging out with us today, because we're tackling a concept that affects every single one of us, whether we realize it or not. We're going to frame our whole discussion today around a really fascinating, honestly slightly terrifying idea: the invisible ceilings we place on our own potential. We love to think our ambitions are totally limitless, but what if they're actually being tightly boxed in by the world immediately around us? Well, today we are going to break down exactly how our surroundings dictate our reality, and more importantly, how we can completely shatter that ceiling by mastering the spaces we occupy. Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to genuinely reflect on this for a second. Ask yourself right now, what is secretly capping your dreams? Is it a lack of talent? Is it time? Or could it be something entirely different? Something so completely woven into your everyday life that you don't even see it anymore? To get to the bottom of this, we're going to explore a deeply personal anecdote from our source material. It's a story that perfectly captures how our highest, most ambitious aspirations can completely shift shape depending on the actual rooms we find ourselves standing in.
So let's start right at the beginning. Section 1, the teenage dream, setting the ultimate goal.
Our author traces a pretty remarkable journey here. Picture this. At just 17 years old, the author is sitting in a room, literally remembering the exact atmosphere, even the specific notebook they used, and they write down this massive, audacious long-term goal. The goal? To get a PhD in architectural engineering at MIT. And why MIT? Well, as a teenager, the author quite literally just Googled the top engineering schools in the whole world. MIT popped up at number 1, and boom, the decision was made. Now, fast forward to the present day. The author is actually a PhD candidate in China right now, doing incredible work in this super complex field of low to ultra-low frequency vibration isolation. But the real turning point, the moment this huge realization hit them, it didn't actually happen in a lab. It happened at a recent dinner, just casually eating with lab mates who happened to be postdoctoral students. To really understand why this random dinner was such a big deal, we have to look back at the mindset the author started out with. From the absolute second that decision was made at 17, the author held a supreme, almost intimidating level of respect and honor for anyone who had a PhD. To them, it was the absolute peak. The people walking around with that title, they were practically living on a different plane of existence. It was this monumental goal that just commanded intense reverence. But, as time goes on, reality sets in, and goals evolve.
That brings us to Section 2, Normalizing the Dream, the reality of proximity.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the profound shift in perspective that happens here. During that dinner with those postdoc lab mates, the author was just struck by this incredibly simple fact. They were all just sitting there, eating, talking, and calling each other by their first names. Calling them doctors actually felt totally weird because it just wasn't the norm in that setting. Nothing about the environment was screaming that these were highly credentialed, top-tier academics. It was literally just some friends sharing a meal. And this triggers a fascinating psychological shift. Sitting in that totally casual dinner setting, that massive, intimidating dream of a teenager suddenly felt incredibly close. Why? Just sheer proximity. The author looked around and realized that from their church to the campus, they were entirely surrounded by people who were either pursuing or had already graduated with PhDs. Because of that everyday proximity, getting a PhD was, in the author's own words, no longer a big deal. Now, let's be super clear here. The author totally acknowledges it's still a massive achievement and always will be. But that overwhelming mystique, that was totally gone. They were in the trenches doing the real work, which is exactly why the author actually mentions a kind of humorous distaste for people who flaunt honorary doctorates around like crowns. When you're surrounded by the actual grueling work day in and day out, the illusion fades, right? The impossible just becomes your daily routine. And that deeply personal realization leads right into the core philosophical thesis of the material we're looking at today.
Let's look at Section 3, the power of environment, redefining the ceiling.
So the crucial point is this quote right here. Your environment literally defines the cap of your dreams and what you think possible. I just want you to let the gravity of that metaphor sink in for a second. What you actually dream about at night, the absolute limits of your ambition, the very boundaries of your own imagination, they aren't dictated by some innate built-in potential. No, they are dictated entirely by what your environment actually allows you to see. The author gives this strikingly clear example to really drive this thesis home. Just imagine someone who has lived their entire life in post-independence Nigeria, right? A place where having consistent electricity has historically been a massive, everyday challenge. For that person, the concept of just having uninterrupted power for months on end, that's not just a luxury, it might be fundamentally impossible for them to even imagine it happening. You literally cannot dream up a reality if your environment hasn't given you the mental building blocks to construct it in your mind.
But on the flip side, proximity creates possibility. The author actually observed this firsthand. They noticed that their close friends started taking these huge, bold initiatives and trying totally new things with their lives simply because they had access to the author. It wasn't like the author sat them down and handed them some secret magic formula. It was literally just that having access to the author exposed these friends to a completely new set of possibilities. By shifting their environment, even just slightly, through a single relationship, their mental ceiling was raised. And this brings us to a really critical nuance in the author's theory.
Section 4. Tangible versus intangible. Two types of environments.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact difference we're talking about. First, we have what's called the tangible environment. This is your physical reality, the city you live in, the room you are literally sitting in right this second. It puts a very real, hard cap on what you deem possible. But then we have the intangible environment. This is a mental state of existence, and according to the author, this intangible environment completely supersedes the physical one. Yes, your physical environment is powerful, for sure, but it is always subservient to the mental environment you've cultivated.
So how do we actually apply this in real life? It's a two-step process, and you absolutely cannot skip step one. Step one, you must create the intangible mental environment first. You have to actively expand your mind before you can successfully expand your physical reality. Then step two, once your mind is expanded, you will naturally start to outgrow your physical environment, and that is when you change it. Listen to me closely on this. If you try to skip step one, like if you just pack up all your stuff and move to a new city or take a totally new job without doing the work to change your intangible mental environment first, you are just going to be driven by the exact same old programming from your previous environment. You're basically just packing up your invisible ceiling and taking it with you. Which brings us to the final, and honestly perhaps the most vital phase of our explainer. How do you actually apply this as an adult?
Let's wrap up with Section 5. Access is not possession, capitalizing on new rooms.
As adults, we have agency, right? We can actively choose our environments. There are very concrete steps you can take to intentionally buy into rooms of possibility. First off, be incredibly intentional about the specific rooms you are entering. Second, go out of your way to expose yourself not just to what you already think is possible, but to things you never even knew existed. Third, and this is a big one, be prepared to pay financially to get access to these rooms. Sometimes, the literal price of admission to a brand new reality costs money, and you have to view that as an investment in uncapping your dreams. And finally, when you do get in, never ever abuse the access you've gained. Treat the opportunity with the absolute respect it deserves.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because all of this leads up to one ultimate challenge. What will you actually do with that access once you have it? Think about it. You've changed your mental state. You've paid the price. You've intentionally walked into the new room. But simply standing in the room, that isn't the finish line. In fact, it's literally just the starting line.
I want you to burn this definition right into your memory. Access is not possession. This is a drop-the-mic concept drawn straight from a chapter in the author's 2022 book. Gaining entry to a space of possibility absolutely does not mean you automatically own that possibility. Getting a seat at the table doesn't mean you've actually eaten the meal. Just because you are standing in the presence of greatness or standing right next to a huge opportunity does not automatically mean that greatness or that opportunity is yours.
At the end of the day, it all comes down to action. As the author so powerfully puts it, what you did with access would be yours, a memory or a life. If you just stand there and casually observe the room, it just becomes a fleeting memory. But if you capitalize on it, if you really engage, if you put in the work, then it becomes your life. You have to take that raw access and physically transform it into reality through your own effort.
We have covered some incredible ground today, all the way from a teenager's ambitious, sky-high goals to the realization of how proximity totally normalizes our wildest dreams, to the undeniable truth that our environment is what sets our limits. But please remember, the mental environment has to change before the physical one ever can. So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to ponder. What mental room do you need to step into today, right now, to uncap your tomorrow? Think really hard about that intangible environment. Start curating it immediately. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one. Keep expanding those ceilings.